So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for the Big Shift mega panel. I do like the sound of mega panel. It makes it sound very grand. The international distribution business has really, in many ways, changed the face of production in international TV in recent years as the demand for content increases ever more. And the guys I've got with me on the panel today have all been at the forefront of that change, and they've worked through they've come to a point where their jobs are fundamentally different to where they were probably 10 years ago. I'm going to start by asking you, Maria, when you think back 10 years to what it was to be a distribution business, what are the key changes, and where do you think, what was the point where it was clear that you had to start looking at different business models in order for content to sit in your catalogue?
If I look at it from ITV's point of view, 10 years ago, ITV was pretty much a British producer, almost exclusively a British producer. And 10 years ago, the mechanics of the business and the interface between a producer and a distributor was fairly well drawn. So there was a point at which a producer needed top-up funding, and a distributor stepped in, produced the money for the top-up funding, and then waited a certain period of time before deciding to launch the show. And it was much more of a linear business. It was a much more of a linear process for the UK. Where we are now is very, very, very different. It's a lot, there's a lot more fluidity between when a distributor and when a producer talk. You have to get the distributors in much earlier. They are so essential to funding a show. If I just talk about the UK, in the UK, the idea that it's now top-up is, you can forget it, it's not top-up anymore. And in some of the cases and some of the shows, some of the very ambitious shows that we're making, it's the bulk of the funding is now coming out of what the distributor can deliver, whether that's co-production or whether it's deficit funding. And the other big shift for ITV is that we're no longer a UK-only producer-distributor. We've made a lot of effort to become much more of a global, much more of a balanced business. So as we move across territories, how we behave and when distributors and producers connect changes, it shifts.
Cathy, Endemol Shine, but originally Endemol, was always well known for its focus on format production and having a really big, sizable catalogue. So there was high volume at that, and there has been at that business for a very long time. But it feels like the business model at Endemol Shine has changed to make sure that you're getting even more stuff, I guess. But how do you feel that that's happened?
Well, I think if you go back, which is nearly 10 years, when I joined Endemol, and Endemol acquired Southern Star, who was a distributor, to really kick off their distribution. They had a lot of assets. They weren't really distributing in a global fashion. So that was bringing what Southern Star had and giving that a structure. And then obviously we've had a merger since then with Shine. And I think those mergers were identifying what parts of the catalogue they were light in on both sides. There was certain areas that Shine were stronger on, Endemol was stronger on, and bringing those together so you have a balanced catalogue. Endemol were global, have always been global in non-scripted, but they actually did have a lot of scripted businesses. It's just because at that time the attention on that scripted product was much more domestic. You didn't really see it travelling as much as it does now. So I think, with the consolidation of the catalogue, it's also made us focus on the genres we want to be in and where we need to, where we're going to invest more in certain areas.
So, Louise, if you, let's take it for granted that distributors are getting involved much earlier in a process now. How are you finding out about projects, and are you acting as a commissioner? What happens for you to get involved in projects so much earlier? Is it down to consolidation of the all three business?
No, I think probably any distributors sort of key mission statement is sell more content for more money to more customers. I mean, it's those kind of 3 points. And I mean, I think this panel's really dealing with the kind of front end of that, which is how do you get more content to sell? And I think inevitably that means getting involved in developing shows earlier, you know, financing treatments, scripts, and just that's your way to kind of hope that you can then work with the producers to get those shows commissioned and financed and to market, and that you can be selling them. I think the challenge with that is making sure that there's still enough producer back end so that they make a profit from the shows and that all the money doesn't go into financing them. But in essence for us, yeah, that kind of move towards developing shows with producers and also working with them to find kind of non-traditional broadcast partners outside of the traditional kind of UK PSBs has been a big focus of the last year, driven by, I think, a competitive landscape in terms of distributing content.
Keren, do you think that producers have, or how have producers reacted to this change? Because obviously the economics have changed in how a show is being put together. Is it a difficult conversation to have with a producer that you'd like to get involved at a much earlier stage?
I think it's mixed feelings for the producers probably, because I think on the one hand you have more opportunities today to finance your shows, and on the other hand it's enough when you have your own team weighing in, giving notes, then you have the commissioning team weighing in, giving notes. And now to have this additional layer of the distributor, because ultimately the distributor is putting a lot of money up front, so they do want to have some kind of creative involvement and even say in order to help shape the final product. So that's another headache maybe for the producer. But it's a necessity today, and I think they all realize it. And I also think part of their motivation when choosing who to partner with in terms of distributors is they're looking for a distributor that will bring them this added value, not just their pure money.
Anyone else with any thoughts on the relationship with producers and how to manage that?
I think most of the producers we work with, they want their show to connect with as many people as possible. So they don't resist the idea at all of getting some input from a distributor or, you know, a co-production partner, but it's a fine line. I mean, they've got a difficult job themselves in balancing the needs of the commissioners, the talent they're working with, and we call ourselves a creative-led business, and we have to live by that. So there's a limit to what the distribution business within ITV does when it around the creativity. It doesn't set the creative brief. It doesn't. So we've got to be honest about that. What the distributor does is try to find the appropriate level of funding to make the show that the producer wants to make, that the commissioner has ordered, and we've got to make sure we understand that.
Yeah, I think there's also a sort of good point that you touched on there about, I think it's important for any project to have a kind of lead editorial creative voice. And again, in the kind of quite complicated landscape that you know, Keren and Maria just described, it's who's the key buyer, you know, who's the one who actually is sort of making the really important creative decisions. And in a world where you've got a much broader mix of financing partners, I think that can be quite complicated in terms of who wants what and how you manage it.
The risk is obviously much larger for you guys putting money up front. So how, Cathy, are you identifying projects? What makes you think, right, this is worth, you know, a significant check that I'm going to put up front?
Well, in all the different genres that we invest in, because we invest in, I know we're talking about predominantly scripted here, but we also invest a lot in non-scripted. You look at a project, you look at the talent, who's making it, their track record, the type of project it is, where you think you can sell it. And as I say, no one ever sets out to develop a show that doesn't sell, but there are certain areas that, you know, will have maybe a broader reaching audience than others, and you just weigh up the money. It's a financial calculation based on what you know, your experience. And sometimes there will be that, I just have a feeling about this, and talent attachments. And all of us work with internal and also external producers that we have long-term relationships with. I think it's also looking at their portfolio. Of course, would like everyone to develop and produce long-running, returning series, but sometimes it's a mix. They might be doing this one-off, and I also think that it's about supporting what their goals are as well.
It's interesting that producers now they've accepted for a large part that this is happening. Have you ever, what kind of examples can you give, Louise, of a really good experience you've had in this sort of financing?
I think probably, or one that we're excited about, is White Dragon, which is going to launch as an ITV commission. It will launch later this year. And we financed the first script on that. So, and then, Jack and Harry, it wasn't a Jack and Harry Williams written show, but it was under their production auspices, but it was from two new writers, Mark Denton and Johnny Stockwood. So it was a risk, but we kind of backed their creative vision for the show. We backed Jack and Harry as a production business. ITV commissioned it, and we attached Amazon as a co-producer in the US. So that was one which kind of happily, ticked all the boxes, and we've equally got others that have been a lot tougher. But that's the type of example of a project that we really loved, that we've managed to develop, that's got commissioned, and we've got co-production financing for, and is going to be on air in the autumn. So I think that was a great example for us.
As Cathy said, most of this relates to drama and scripted programming primarily. But Keren, we were having a chat last week, and you were talking about this actually also filtering into the unscripted space. Can you give us some colour on that?
Yes, I think it's so hard to get your ideas out there, whatever genre it is, and people more and more are looking to get their non-scripted formats commissioned outside their primary territory, and then to take it to the global market. And we partnered up with the Youngest Media, Lucas and David, and obviously David is the creator of Money Drop. So talk about track record, right? So that's the first take, and they came to us with an idea for a very simple game show, which is based on the pen and paper word search. And they transformed it into a studio-based game show where couples literally need to, well, they're pairs, they're not necessarily couples, need to lock in the answer by finding it in the word puzzle. And they came to us, both of our creative teams further developed it. Then together we went to the Keshet channel and pretty much sold it to the channel, and that's how we really financed it. So Keshet International financed it, the channel put some money, and Youngest Media co-financed it, and we produced a season for our network in Israel, and we're now launching the format here.
There's a lot of talk about consolidated IP and an IP that's just locked up at the start, and I think that's probably relevant to each company here and a lot of companies out there. But for an indie producer who's out there, what sort of assurances can you guys give them that coming to you with this sort of model is a good way to go?
Can you explain what you mean by consolidated?
Well, a lot of so I was speaking to someone last week who described with the intense consolidation that has happened in international television over the last few years, there is a lot of projects that are locked up with certain people as before you start. So ITV's bought companies in Italy and Scandinavia, but you're still looking for other producers to come and talk to you about this sort of model.
Yeah, I mean, you are right. ITV has grown exponentially in the last few years, and we've acquired talent, whether that's buying the companies, setting people up. So we set up the wonderful Pubirth in Denmark in our own company recently. We bought Cattleya in Italy. We bought a company in France called Tetra. So we have been adding companies, and the vast majority of the content that is sold by GE, our distribution team now, is in-house, because we now have nearly 50 production labels under one, overall banner of ITV. But that doesn't mean that GE is shut to new indies. And GE often is the first point of contact with people that we then look for a longer-term relationship with. GE had a relationship with Mammoth. Mammoth is one of the biggest drama production companies in the UK. They have some huge number of shows in development, I think 12 plus at the moment. So they are phenomenally talented people. The first relationship was with GE as a distribution, and there was a distributor, semi-indie relationship between us before Mammoth were then bought, or majority was bought, and they became much more, one of the ITV production labels. So GE's always out there, and it's always open to the idea of bringing in new talent to the organisation.
And is that the case at
Endemol? It's the same. We have some long-standing third-party relationships, and we're always looking for product. Of course, there's certain areas where we'd say, well, we're really strong in this, so it's not what we need right now. But I do know if you're kind of referring to people say, oh, maybe I don't want that show to go to Endemol Shine because they won't push it, they'll push their own shows. I don't think any distributor takes on a show not to try to sell it everywhere. It's just that kind of comment, and it's just not realistic. I mean, most salespeople want to sell whatever they can, and most producers want to produce, what they can. And I think you should feel comfortable with that relationship with the distributor before you embark on it.
With production and distribution coming so much closer together, and as Lorraine said, the lines blurring so much, various models have popped up which certainly wouldn't have even been conceivable 10 years ago. Louise, you've done an interesting deal with one of your shareholders, Liberty and Virgin, which is a cousin company. Can you sort of outline what that deal is? Because that's an interesting way to guarantee pipeline.
Yeah, sure. So this came out of our 50% owner of all three, Liberty Global, and their desire to get original content for their SVOD services, specifically Virgin in the UK. So the basic model is a sort of a third, a third from the Virgin Liberty Global sort of pot, a third from a kind of co-producer pot, which is all three Media International's sort of we have to find that, and a third from us as a distribution advance. We have one show commissioned through that route, The Feed, which again Amazon are co-producing it in the US. Really excited about it. So it's from Studio Lambert, so that'll be great. But it's really fantastic to have a new commissioning partner outside of the kind of usual 5 homes to go to. It brings its own set of complications in the sense that, Virgin haven't commissioned shows before, we haven't. Suddenly you're into a whole new world of commissioning agreements, talent agreements, clearances that, to be honest, we hadn't had to deal with before. So it takes you into a different space, and it takes you into a different space editorially. But it is a new route to market and a new buyer, which is fantastic. So we're exploring that as well with Acorn for their new SVOD service on Series 2 of Agatha Raisin. So that model of trying to think a little bit more creatively with producers about who the commissioning partner is something that we're working really hard on and are really excited about, and is starting to pay off.
It also seems like there is a sense that working together, working with new partners, is a way to guarantee pipeline. So you've got the Jeremy Fox's Atrium, which is bringing together various SVOD players to put pools of money together. Keren, how many different models are you expecting to see? Do you think there is? Do you feel like you're getting to a point where you've kind of got this nailed down and you know exactly what you're doing, or is it going to be a continually creative renewal that you have to engage in to ensure pipeline?
No, I agree with you, Louise. I think if you think you have it nailed down, then you're in trouble. You know, our business is evolving as we speak. You know, there are new players and new markets. So you need to be very open-minded, and I always say I'd like to think we're also creative, not only in the content that we develop and produce, but in the way we do business. And if it's, you know, coming in as a co-producer or co-developer, for example, you know, when you're not as big in size like my colleagues here, as you said, Jesse, it's about guaranteeing the pipeline. So you need to be creative to guarantee that pipeline. So, for example, what we do is we have a division, I call it a division, but really it's one very talented lady called Atar Dekel, who heads up our global drama, meaning outside of our production territories, which are the UK, Germany, US, India, and Mexico. We look to partner up with the best and most creative producers in those territories, be it Belgium, Japan, we're doing it in actually US Hispanic, to co-develop, co-finance ideas and together go sell them in their primary market or not necessarily. And then KI would put in the distribution MG, in return get the distribution rights, and hopefully sell it to a global audience. We're just taking out a project now, which we did with Dimension, which are brilliant producers out of Belgium. Actually, it was Jan who came to us because he really wanted to produce a show that is set in the diamond industry. So this is really a family thriller, family crime drama about an ultra-Orthodox family in Belgium, and they run the business. And they came to us, obviously, because of, I think, the subject matter. Jan had this idea. We attached an Israeli writer, actually 2 Israeli writers. We financed the script, and now we're taking it to market.
Great. Maria, any thoughts on that sort of the process of creative renewal?
I mean, when you were talking about new models, they're all variations, I think, of the same thing, which is this idea of co-developing. So we've all been used to, and because this is a panel focused on distributors, most of us, when we say co-production, we actually mean co-funding. We actually mean the show's been commissioned by one entity somewhere in the world, and then we go and get some upfront early money from somebody else. The co-development is the new bit, and that is true creative sharing of the vision of what the show is. And I think we're all involved in it one way or another. We're all trying to crack that real co-development where it's owned by more than one producer stroke platform. I would say from our experience, having more than one voice at the table starts to get really, really, really complicated. So I'd be fascinated to see how Atrium works. You know, we haven't seen it yet, so I think it would be really interesting to see whether you can actually have multiple voices from different countries at the table and get a show that works. We tend to go a little smaller. Because we are now this international network of producers, and especially, we're sort of back to drama again, sorry, we have 18 dedicated producers across the globe now, and that makes it a lot easier for us to have true co-development, because it's a producer talking to a producer without the distributor being in the room, because it's not really a distributor conversation at that point. And we have a number of new projects that have been sparked between France and the UK. That one's a really rich source at the moment. And we have a couple which are sort of hybrid American, British, and they really have to strike a balance. They have to have characters, they have to have storylines that fit more than one country, and that's the tricky bit.
And what you'll hear from producers, and certainly what I've been hearing from some producers, is that there's a concern that with distribution money coming in earlier, and you guys having a sense of what sells, some producers will say that might lead to sort of derivative programming or something that's ticking boxes. But it feels like you guys are much more keen for them to actually bring their creative ideas. Is that kind of the way to read it, Cathy?
Yeah, they're ultimately the creatives, and they're coming up. What we're giving advice is maybe certain attachments that would help guarantee if you're after a budget that's level where you're going to have to look for a financier, another broadcaster, a co-producer. But you're not trying to tell them what to do their job, and I don't think you can, if creativity was going through like ticking boxes, we'd all have lots of shows in our catalogues that work all the time, and we've all had a few that unfortunately haven't. So I think they drive it. It's just giving your advice and your insight to help them, because often we'll sit down and say, okay, well, and I'm sure we all do this all the time, you look at a show, what are the challenges, what are the options, option A, B, C, or however, there's a way of putting that together. And sometimes there will be, as a group would say, we are a bit light in a certain area. Is anyone got a particular interest in this? And can we assist really, which is financing, to do more development? Do you want to do more development if you had more? But I just think it has to creatively be driven by the person who's ultimately producing the show.
So in a sense, it's more like you're thinking more like a commissioner in some ways, that you know what your clients want. You're aware that there are likely to be projects like that out there. So it's a case of finding them and then working with the producer to ensure that their vision will be reached.
I think certainly at the moment we know that Europe, for example, keeps saying they can't get enough crime procedurals. So we have said to a couple of our production companies that we work with, that one and that one that are on your slate, we'll fund those, because we think actually we can see a way of sort of stitching together something, a finance plan for them, in essence. So in that sense, it can be quite directional. But I'm sure we'd all say the same thing. What you're really backing is talent and a vision for a program that is authentic, original, and different. And probably the worst thing that someone can come in and say to us is it's like that show or that show or that show. And we're not interested in that at all. And I think, again, National Treasure, Kiri are two shows that we probably wouldn't have said ticked traditional sales boxes, but have sold brilliantly well and won all sorts of awards. So just as you think you've cracked it, something comes along to change it, really, doesn't it?
And I think nothing takes away of how you feel when you read a really good script. It's like when you read a really good book. That's where the magic starts. And do you read it straight away? How fast you're involved?
And how much do you want the project to come packaged before you're willing to put some money in? Does it need to have a big producer or a big star or director even attached?
I think being realistic, talent attachments are a big thing for the US. Outside of that, it seems to be slightly less important. But in my experience, you guys might disagree, but if you're taking out a big scripted show to the US, the director, the writer, the key cast are pretty important, which can get a bit hairy actually, because you often don't get those attached till the last minute, and everyone's kind of saying, why haven't you sold this show? And it's sort of picking your moment. You get a very short window to close that deal, but in the US it's particularly important.
Keren, what do you think?
I agree with Louise. I actually think, I mean, in the US, packaging was everything always. And I actually think because of the vast offerings today coming outside of the U.S., I think packaging is becoming more important also outside of the U.S. Also because, with the global SVODs, for them, it's key because they need to stand out. So for us, yes, I think we don't need the entire package in place, obviously, to come on board, but it has to have the key ingredients. So we've partnered up now with a producer on an English-speaking show. Great production company, great producer. That's great. The show is about a true event in modern history. So we kind of know what the show is about and how it ends, right? So we have that. And they had the writer attached and one script. And, I think with those elements, we made the decision to partner up. Obviously, there's a commissioning channel attached. And I think together, hopefully, we'll attach an on-screen talent that will hopefully help us bring in an American partner, right? Because when you invest a lot of money, America is key, let's face it.
Hollywood's helpful, yeah.
Yeah.
We are fast coming to the end of this session. So to wrap up, and this is just me as a nosy journalist, but when I see what you guys are doing and the kind of approaches you're taking, it does feel like your sense of what sells is probably even more acute than it's ever been. And will you ever get to a point?
I disagree.
Will it ever get to a point where you feel that you don't necessarily need to go to the commissioner and you can then just take that directly to market yourself with some sort of platform? This is a very speculative question.
I think that idea has been floated a couple of times. It's difficult from two sides. One is the creative grounding of the show. If you know a show is being made for a certain broadcaster, it allows everyone to have a bit of a shorthand about what that show is intended to be. And secondly, the funding becomes quite tricky if you haven't got a host paying a commission fee.
So it means basically paying even more money to get shows made.
And over my time, there's been some shows where you'll have a producer who doesn't feel they need a broadcaster on board at the start, but you can't underestimate the creative vision that the broadcaster brings to the project as well. And my experience, those that have been funded by some way without at least one broadcaster on board, like no broadcasters, have never really worked.
Louise, any sense
never
of that?
say
Because
never.
all three has tried before with channels.
I think what we wouldn't do is commission a show for All Three Media International. But I think what we might do is look at having 2 or 3 broadcasters in place around an idea that we really loved, and kind of act as a co-commissioner, sort of co-editorial voice on that. But I think for a very specific type of show.
Okay, and Keren, as a last word, I think we've got 45 seconds.
I also never say never. I don't think we'll do it anytime soon on a 1-hour drama. This is something that we are looking to do and may do under KDS, our digital studio, who creates content for young adults, millennials, mid-form, but also 22-minute shows. I think it's easier there to invest yourself, invest in a really original voice, back them up, and then go to market.
Okay, and with that, we are out of time. So if you guys could give the panelists a massive round of applause, please. Thank you very much.